This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Starting today's show is K-State Beef Reproduction Specialist Sandy Johnson discussing her recommendation for evaluating results from pregnancy checks on cattle. K-State Small Ruminant Extension Specialist Kelsey Bentley continues the show as she introduces herself to Kansans and explains her past research. Mike Brouk, K-State Dairy Specialist, wraps up the show by suggesting to producers that they check with their nutritionist to make sure that they have the proper mix of new and old silage before using the 2024 corn silage crop. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Tuesday show discussing evaluating breeding and pregnancy rates for cattle with K-State Beef Reproduction Specialist Sandy Johnson. Sandy, thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Sandy, this time of year for spring calving herds, Preg checking is taking place or has been or will be shortly. And so if they're coming back with some low pregnancy percentages, what are maybe some reasons for that?
Right. There's a number of reasons, and maybe the first couple things we think about is, did the bull get injured or somehow that bull fertility change? And maybe prior to that is, did we test that bull prior to turnout? And so we need to ascertain those things. And then, what animals are open? Are they young females? Are they obviously thin? What was their condition at calving? The body condition score at calving is largely going to determine how soon they start cycling, so those are all things on the cow side. And as we look at some of these young cows that aren't pregnant, I always want to know, how long a breeding season were they exposed to the prior year? Because if you just look at the math, we will have a postpartum interval, a period between calving when they start cycling again. And if it's a young first calf heifer, it's going to be longer. And if she calved late in a long calving period, she may not get pregnant during your next breeding season. And that's almost a mathematical calculation you could make. You can't, they do take some time to recover. So, the female side, largely timing and nutrition. Male side, were they fertile going out? Did they remain that way? And the other thing we always have to make sure of is watching these bulls during the breeding season. They may have good quality semen, but may have been injured or just totally lack the libido to get the job done. And of course, the third big area that we need to consider would be any disease issues. We could have an issue with something like trichomoniasis, where we have we're getting some early embryonic loss, and depending on, were we seeing, when we do the pregnancy diagnosis, what were the stage of pregnancies that we saw? And sometimes that helps diagnose not only the disease side, but, potentially if a bull got hurt, we know about how long it takes him to recover. What's that whole mix of things that would go in there? We do have a publication that deals with why aren't my cows pregnant, so would direct people to that for more information.
What percentage is really ideally 100%, but where is it concerning for how many cattle aren't pregnant?
Well, if we look at some of our a little bit of benchmarking, if we're in 88 to 93% pregnant on our cow herd, we're probably in a pretty good spot. You say you want 100% pregnancy rate, and theoretically you do, but you can't spend an inordinate amount of money to reach that 100%. And it's probably, if you fed every cow to some great level, it's harder and harder to get that next cow pregnant, right? And so you can't keep spending forever. There's a balance between what we spend on nutrition and the reproductive outcome. And, another thing I might address is, on a yearling heifers, I think a lot of people think, well, I've selected these heifers, they should all be great and wonderful. And yeah, but if you're 88% pregnant on those yearling heifers, that's kind of a number that we see came out of a lot of the Missouri Show Me Select data. And there's about 10,000 heifers in that database last time I looked at it. So, depending on how many heifers you have, don't expect them always to be 95. There's some of those that just weren't going to make it into that herd to keep.
For people who do have those lower percentages and it looks like it's maybe a bull issue, should they go ahead and get them tested now so they can game plan for next year?
Well, that's always the question. We need to remember that when we do semen evaluation as part of a breeding soundness exam, it's a look at one point in time. And so if we had a 60% pregnancy rate or something that's really going to hurt your pocketbook, you may want to test that bull to rule out other things like disease. And maybe if the bulls hadn't been trick tested, we do a semen test, we do a trick test, kind of depends on what our best guess is. But chances are, if it's real low, we would want to look at those bulls. I was just at a meeting last week, and, some of the more recent databases, anywhere from 10 to 20% fail a breeding soundness exam on a group of mature bulls. All right. So when we turn out multiple bulls in a pasture, we often really don't know who's getting the job done. With DNA testing, we can learn more of those things, but, there may have been one bull doing more work than we often thought when we don't test those bulls as frequently. And so as we talk about that, we also, if you're a spring and a fall calving herd, it's really prudent to, test those bulls prior to each breeding season. It's just a risk to turn out a bull that's not going to get the job done. Think of it as insurance. And, did you need your insurance today? I didn't need mine, and I'm glad, but I still pay for it. And semen testing bulls, doing a full breeding soundness exam is risk management and insurance in my mind.
Sandy, is there any nutrition things we need to think about as bulls have been taken out and are getting cared for and prepping into the winter and fall?
Some of those young bulls in particular may have lost some condition during the breeding season, and probably they all did to a certain degree, but we know that body condition score is associated with semen quality, and so we want to have them in good condition prior to the start of their next breeding season. And so think about that factory takes 60 days to go through the total cycle of producing sperm. So at bare minimum, you'd want to have those bulls in good condition so they're producing high quality semen in advance of the breeding season, a couple months ahead of the start of that. So yeah, you can rough some of the mature bulls through the winter, but make sure, you provide enough that they're in good condition to have good semen quality at the start of the breeding season.
Sandy, what about for those cattle that are pregnant?
Well, we're glad. And in some cases, if you stage those pregnancies, depending on what's going on, how much forage you have, you might want to take some marketing opportunities with pregnant females if you have more than what your forage is going to look at. Clearly, there's some, if you're selling animals right now, it's a good time to be selling, not so much buying. So there's that to consider. And really tied with that would be, what is our weaning plan and plan to get condition on those cows if they need it through the course of the winter. And I think we often, we get calf wean and we kind of forget about these cows for a while because we're doing other things. And I get that. But if you can get that cow so she's in good condition going into the winter and before this big jump in nutrient demand from that growing fetus is, she's just in a better position to handle any weather stress. Reproductive performance is going to be better. So fall is the time on a spring calving cow to correct nutrition. If she's lost some condition, okay, that's fine, but let's try to put a little bit back. And we see more and more data that shows the importance of supplementation, particularly protein supplementation during that last trimester on the weaning weight of those calves that they're pregnant with at the time. So, essentially we're helping the embryonic development or the fetal development of that calf by providing adequate protein that's showing up in, greater weaning weights. So, it's, you got to pay the expense to do it, but what I've seen is paying off in pounds of lean calf. And so it's an option to improve your bottom line.
Sandy, if people are wanting to find out some more resources around caring for their cattle during this time, do you have any recommendations?
Well, we always try to have a number of things available on ksubeef.org, as well as in our Beef Tips newsletter. And depending on specifically what they're looking at, those are the general recommendations.
Sandy, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us some information around caring for your bulls and cattle post-preg checking and breeding.
Glad to be here.
That was K-State Beef Reproduction Specialist Sandy Johnson. A couple of the publications that she recommends cattle producers to check out if they're struggling to understand why their cattle might not be pregnant include K-State Research and Extension publications. The first one is titled Why Aren't My Cows Pregnant?, which is publication MF3585. The other one is titled Understanding and Diagnosing Pregnancy Loss in Beef Cattle, which is publication MF3584. I will link both of these publications in today's show notes on agtoday.net, or you can also locate them for yourselves by going to the K-State Research and Extension Bookstore at Bookstore.ksre.ksu.edu. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll be introducing the new K-State Research and Extension Small Ruminant Specialist, Kelsey Bentley. We're now cutting to that short break. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show getting to know a new extension specialist here at Kansas State University, K-State Small Ruminant Extension Specialist, Kelsey Bentley. Kelsey, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, great to be here, Shelby. Thank you.
Kelsey, first wanting to talk a little bit about your history and how you ended up where you're at now, and you were involved in livestock all the way from your youth.
Yeah, so I grew up showing all four species through 4-H and FFA, really immersed in the club lambs, however, and really knew that was something that I was passionate about, but I didn't know that I could maybe one day potentially have a job in sheep. So ended up going to NC State for my undergrad, and there I connected with Dr. Billy Flowers, started doing some swine research, and from that, I then discovered, I really, really like research, but I said, let's see if we can get back to the sheep roots. Decided to reach out to Dr. Scott Bowdridge all the way up in West Virginia University. Went up there for a master's program. Originally, I was supposed to be the livestock judging coach for West Virginia. However, as we all know, right within that kind of 2020-21 frame, the pandemic hit, and so I never ran a team. From that, though, I did end up applying for a fellowship to stay on and continue my PhD, and I received that fellowship. So I stayed another 3 years, and I would go on to be highly molecular, kind of a parasitology/immunology, looking at antibody levels within sheep, and then also how selection for parasite resistance also selects for immune response.
Can you tell us a little bit more just about your research you did at West Virginia?
Yeah, so originally it actually kind of predicated on some work from a previous student, Dr. Andrew Weaver, and what he found was that there was differences in terms of death loss between lambs that were either parasite susceptible or parasite resistant. And we knew that through an EBV, through the National Sheep Improvement Program, or as you'll hear me refer to it, NSIP. So we were able to calculate that individual's genetic merit for either being parasite resistant or susceptible. And what we found was within kind of that first period right before weaning, when we calculated death loss, we noticed that parasite susceptible sheep were dying a whole lot more. Only problem with that is the sheep had not yet been exposed to parasites. So we kind of did some further investigation as to what was driving that death loss, and actually found that it was a Clostridium species known as Clostridium type A. So the CD&T vaccine that I'm sure a lot of producers are familiar with cover types C and D with a tetanus toxoid. However, they do not cover the Clostridium perfringens type A. So those lambs were, with that high pathogen load, parasite susceptible sheep were dying at a higher rate. So that kind of trended us to say, well, let's look at response to vaccination within these sheep. And that's where I kind of arrived on the scene. And from that, we found that parasite-resistant individuals actually also respond better to CD&T vaccination, which is not a parasitic vaccination at all. It's that vaccination to the Clostridium species, which is a bacteria that we talked about previously. So those sheep were able to mount a better immune response to that vaccine, and therefore I think they were able to go on and not succumb to that sickness and die. And so then we also took that even a step further and started looking at, okay, well, if I give these sheep something that makes them sick, let's look at duration and severity of sick behaviors. And wouldn't you know, parasite-susceptible sheep act really, really sick when we give them these. I mean, their head's down, their ears are down, they're weeping from their mucous membrane, so they get snotty noses, they're coughing, they just feel really, really ill. And the low Katahdin sheep, or the parasite-resistant sheep, don't get me wrong, they also feel ill. However, it's looking at the return of those. So when we talk about treatment from a farmer's perspective, you're far more likely to go out and treat the sheep that looks really, really sick. So the parasite-resistant sheep are able to bounce back from that sickness a little bit quicker and show less severity of those sick behaviors, and therefore they're less likely to receive that antimicrobial treatment, whereas parasite-susceptible sheep are more likely to receive that antimicrobial treatment. And then finally, the last little thing that we did to kind of tie this all together was we started looking at the impacts of colostrum. So colostrum, for those of you who don't know, is kind of that first milk that's produced by mom. It needs to not only be a complete form of nutrition, but it also needs to have the appropriate antibodies to provide lamb with kind of that passive immune response early in life. And I like to explain it as get them started on the right foot. And with that, so we talked about the death loss a little bit. The colostrum also played a role into that. So parasite-susceptible ewes had less IgG, which is the main antibody that our body kind of uses. It's highly specific. It's really intense to whatever that mom has experienced within her environment. Susceptible ewes have less IgG when compared to that of parasite-resistant ewes. And when I say less IgG, I'm talking dramatically less IgG, so parasite-resistant ewes have 2.5 times the amount of IgG within their colostrum when compared to that of parasite-susceptible ewes. So it kind of just makes this really kind of unique picture of looking at that kind of immediate death loss. And there's been so many little spin-off projects just looking from that death loss perspective that I kind of would like to continue on while I'm at K-State and kind of put money back in producers' pockets and say, hey, if we implement tools like the National Sheep Improvement Program, you can see less death loss within your herds and also have sheep that are more healthy and should require less antimicrobial treatments.
And you're here at K-State now, Kelsey.
Yes.
How did you end up here?
So I originally was, like I said, I was kind of teetering back and forth. As you've heard, some of my research gets a little molecular, and so sometimes it's kind of hard to describe to just everyday people. But when you really get back to the root of it all, I wanted to make a difference in the sheep industry. I grew up immersed in club lambs, and that was kind of the trajectory that took me all the way to West Virginia, and I felt that I owe it to return to the industry and do something really positive and good for them. So I started exploring the postdocs. I'm not going to lie. I started looking around for postdocs, but I also started applying for some jobs. And the second that the K-State job popped up, I was actually at the American Sheep Industry meeting, and a lot of people came up to me and they were so like, are you going to apply for the K-State job? And I was like, yeah, I'm probably going to apply for it. We'll just have to see. And when I got it, I was just stoked that, you know, I am going to be able to be a part of a very kind of small club. There's not a lot of small ruminant extension specialists throughout the United States. So excited to join that club and excited to start contributing to small ruminant research and extension.
What is some of that work you'll be doing here?
So currently, right now, I've got a lot of county agents reaching out to me wanting to set up programming. Initially, we're going to start with just some of the parasite stuff. So looking at parasites within Kansas or setting up deworming schedules for producers, things that we can do to kind of help with that health and well-being. And then I've also been asked to kind of start to step up a little bit in terms of nutrition, so doing some rations and things like that. So I'm definitely excited to get out and get to meet all the producers across the state and also get linked up with certain extension agents and be able to be a resource for them. Being that specialist title is kind of unique. People come to you with problems. Like I had a phone call the other day where I think I sat on the phone for about an hour and a half, and at the end of it, I asked him, I said, well, I feel like I really didn't solve your problem. And he said, well, it's okay. You gave me somebody to talk to. And I think that's part of being the extension is just for a while, Kansas has not had, or Kansas sheep producers have not had that person to talk to. So I'm super excited to get out there and be that person where if you're experiencing issues or even if you just want to bounce ideas, I want to be that resource and be able to just chat with you guys.
What type of sheep will you be studying here at K-State?
So originally, like I said, I talked a lot about my research with the Katahdins, but now I'm really interested to shift all of that work that we've done because the Katahdin is a composite breed and the Polypay is also a composite breed. So K-State currently has Polypays here, and I am very excited to get them back enrolled into NSIP and kind of elevate that flock to then start also doing all of the research that I just talked about with that particular breed, which will probably be a little bit more relevant to Kansas producers. So excited to start doing that, ramping back up research and doing all of that cool stuff with the Polypays.
If people do have some questions for you, Kelsey, how do you recommend they get in contact with you?
You can find all of my information on the K-State directory. So if you type in Kelsey Bentley, it'll pop up like my faculty page at K-State. But from that, I'll also give you just my information through the podcast. So it's going to be kbentley@ksu.edu. And then my phone number is going to be 919-502-9293.
Kelsey, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shelby.
That was K-State Small Ruminant Extension Specialist Kelsey Bentley. You can email her at kbentley@ksu.edu. That is KBENTLEY@ksu.edu. I will link that and her phone number in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead.
You're listening to Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. Kansas dairy producers wanting to start using the 2024 corn silage crop should check with their nutritionist first to make sure that they have the proper blend of old and new corn silage. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk has more information on using new corn silage.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning the corn silage you have just harvested or will be harvesting very soon. Many of our dairies have already harvested corn silage, and in a few cases, maybe some of you are starting to feed it. And about this time, I usually get quite a few questions about, well, when should we start feeding the new crop silage? When is it safe? And how will that impact our dairy cows? So as we think about this, a couple of things. Number one, our standard answer for the length of the fermentation period is wait at least 3 weeks. However, with some of the new inoculants that we have available today, maybe we can reduce that to a couple of weeks, and that silage would be fully fermented at that time. Really depends on the type of inoculant that you might have used as you harvested your silage crop. Now, that takes care of the fermentation side and making sure that it's well preserved and that the organic acids that are going to be formed have been fully formed and that you're at the right pH. However, there are still some changes that will continue to occur in that silage mass. starch breakdown generally takes about 90 days for it to be fully broken down by the organic acids produced during the fermentation process. So many times we try to wait at least 3 months before we start feeding that new corn silage. And when you start feeding that new corn silage, keep in mind that it may have a different concentration of starch as well as the availability of that starch, depending on how mature the kernel was at the time of harvesting and how well it was kernel processed. So I encourage all of our dairy farmers to work very carefully with their nutritionist as you make your changes to new corn silage. It is always best to blend new and old for a period of time, at least a week, sometimes as much as 2 weeks, as you introduce the new corn silage to your dairy cows. It is not uncommon to see drops in milk production when we do this, and a lot of times this simply just has to do with either the availability of the starch or the breakdown of the fiber in the new corn silage as compared to the older corn silage that you are blending in. So that is the reason a mix for a couple of weeks is generally the best way to introduce cows to this new corn silage. It also gives your nutritionist opportunity to make adjustments in the overall starch and starch availabilities in your rations based on the new corn silage. So some additional testing of your new corn silage would be necessary. Even if you pulled samples during the harvest process, you really need to test the fermented feed to see what the starch availability actually is, as well as digestibility of the fiber contained in that corn silage. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to work with their nutritionist as they start to feed the 2024 corn silage crop.
Thanks, Mike. And while we have a moment, this reminder about next month's 2024 Kansas Landowners Conference being held the 10th and 11th at the K-State Alumni Center in Manhattan. According to K-State Research and Extension farm economist Robin Reed, this year's event has an additional day to allow participants to attend more breakout sessions. She says the conference is designed to help landowners removed from agriculture learn more about managing properties and developing relationships with tenants. Due to the recent downturn in the farm economy, Reed says that this year's event will include more breakout sessions around topics that will impact every Kansas landowner's bottom line. She adds that landowners on the fence about participating should strongly consider it because industry experts will be presenting on the topics that they receive the most questions about. More information about the event, including registration costs, is available online from the K-State Department of Agricultural Economics. That's the K-State Department of Agricultural Economics. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.